Felicitous greetings, fellow fanatics. Greetings and salutations, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Hideth, and today we're taking a look at Kings of Israel, a biblically themed cooperative game by Funhill Games. Please keep in mind that this is a Kickstarter copy of the game. As such, I do have a few extra cards, and the profit pawns have been replaced with meeples. Other than that, the game is pretty much the same as the retail version. Released in 2014, Kings of Israel was Funhill Games' first title. In such, 2 to 4 players will take on the role of prophets of the Lord, traveling about Israel, preaching against sin, shattering idols, and constructing altars. Each round, sin will spread throughout the Kingdom of Israel. By spreading God's word and building altars, players will attempt to turn Israel away from sin. If they fail, the nation will be conquered by Assyria and carried into captivity. History is against the players, so it won't be an easy task. To set up the game, you'll begin by shuffling the ability, blessing, location, resource, and sin and punishment decks. Each player will draw an ability card and then takes a prophet pawn, placing them on the starting space indicated on the card. Ability cards give each player something unique. They may give you a new action or improve an existing one. You'll also draw 2 cards from the top of the resource deck to form your starting hand. Take one of the altar tokens and place it in Samaria, and take the king tracker and place it on the top of the track on the Saul space. Next, you'll need to do the initial sin setup. Draw a number of sin cards equal to the number of players plus 2. If you draw any nations or shall be again cards, discard them and immediately draw a replacement. Place 1 sin cube on each location drawn. Now repeat the process, this time drawing 1 less card but placing 2 sin cubes on the relevant spaces. Repeat the process once more, drawing 1 less card, which means it should be equal to the number of players this time, and place a golden idol on each space drawn this time. After that, take all location cards and reshuffle them back into the deck. Choose a player to take the starting player card and you're ready to begin. Each full round consists of 4 phases, the first of which is the King's Godliness phase. During this phase, if the ruler is a good king, indicated by a gold background, the starting player will draw a blessing card which they can play at any time. However, if the ruler is an evil king, indicated by a red background, then you'll instead have to draw a sin and punishment card. Most sin and punishment cards are resolved immediately and discarded. However, a number of them will have the text foretold event. If there is anything above that text, you'll immediately resolve that part of the card as normal. After that, take the card and place it back into the deck face up, placing it under a number of cards equal to the number of players in the game. If you've done this correctly, you should still be able to see the title of the card. After that, immediately draw and resolve another sin and punishment card. When you eventually draw a foretold event card that is already face up, resolve the text that appears after the foretold event text. When in the King's Godliness phase, you'll notice that a number of kings are only used in 3 or 4 player games. These are short-lived rulers who are not represented by a full game round. When you come to one of these kings, you'll play out the King's Godliness phase and nothing else. After resolving that, immediately move the king tracker down 1 space and start the next round, which begins with another King's Godliness phase. The second phase of each round is the Sin Increases phase. You'll skip this on the first round, but for all future rounds, draw a number of cards equal to the number of players plus 1, and place a single cube on each location drawn. If you draw a nation, you do not place the cubes on that nation itself, but rather on each location connected to it. Finally, if you draw a Shall Be Again card, you'll remove it from the game and reshuffle location discard back into the deck before drawing another card to replace it. When placing sin cubes, if a location has 3 or more cubes after you place them and does not already contain an idol, you'll place a golden calf in that spot. If you ever have to place a sin cube on a space that already has a golden calf, then you'll also have to place a cube on each location adjacent by road. The third phase of each round is the Prophet's Work phase. This is where each player will be able to take actions to try and further their goals. Beginning with the starting player, each prophet may take 4 actions, and you may repeat the same action multiple times if desired. The first action you may take is to move. To move, simply move from your current location to an adjacent one. Alternatively, you may discard a grain or cattle card from your hand when moving to move up to 3 road spaces as a single action. If you are adjacent to a coast, you may choose to use a sea route rather than a road. Next, you have the option to preach. To preach, you simply remove 1 sin cube from your current location. Similarly, you may also destroy an idol if there's one at your location. However, this costs 2 actions to do rather than just 1. The remaining actions all relate to resources. Firstly, you may acquire a resource. Simply draw a card from the resource deck and add it to your hand. If you have more than 6 resource cards in your hand at any time, you must immediately discard cards of your choice until you're back down to 6. If you're in the same space as another prophet, you may take an action to give resources to them, allowing you to give up to 2 of your cards to that player. If you're in a space that has an altar, you may spend a grain and a cattle to make a sacrifice. When you do this, you'll remove all sin cubes in your current location, plus 1 sin cube from each location adjacent by road. Finally, if you have stone, wood, and gold cards, you may spend 1 of each to build an altar. Remember that building altars is your ultimate goal in the game. However, each location may only have 1. After all players have taken their actions, you'll proceed to the end of round phase. Move the king tracker down 1 space, and if the game isn't over, then pass the first player card to the next player so that they'll begin the next round. The game will continue like this until 1 of 4 end conditions is met. If the king tracker reaches the Israel destroyed space, then Assyria invades and carries the people of Israel into bondage, and the players lose as a result. Alternatively, the game can end in an early loss if players ever need to place a sin cube or an idol but have no pieces left in the reserve. However, if the players manage to build a number of altars equal to the number of players plus 5, then they win the game. If you find the game too hard or too easy, the rulebook includes some suggestions for tweaking the difficulty. For a harder game, it includes rules for playing with a false prophet that will go around and actively seek to destroy altars. For an easier game, you may allow players to draw a blessing whenever they make a sacrifice. For further options, there's also an official print-and-play supplement which includes a total of 7 different difficulty levels that you can play through. Component-wise, the game is quite solid. It includes plenty of well-crafted wooden components inside. Just keep in mind that if you're playing with the retail version, then it only includes the wooden pawns for the prophets, not the meeples that the Kickstarter version includes. The ability and resource cards have a very comic book-like aesthetic to them, while the blessing and sin and punishment cards have a more serious tone with their monochrome artwork. The cards themselves are of decent thickness, and everything does look rather nice. For the sake of gameplay, the map is not made to scale. However, the roads and sea routes do represent the historical trade routes that were in use at the time. All in all, Kings of Israel was an impressive first showing from Funhill. It takes obvious inspiration from Pandemic, but does enough things different that it doesn't feel like a clone, and certainly feels more thematic. As I've mentioned before on this channel, I did actually get rid of my copy of Pandemic because Kings of Israel fills the same niche, but feels like it does a much better job with it. This is a title that is both unapologetically Christian and unapologetically a hobbyist game. It never sacrifices one for the other. It gives players interesting tactical decisions, looks good on the table, and has a fair bit of variety. In conclusion, I find Kings of Israel to be worthy of a respectable 8.2 out of 10. But we're not quite through here yet. I should also take a few moments to mention that in 2015, an official digital adaptation was released on Steam. For the most part, this is the same game and doesn't require a full review. If you're familiar with the tabletop game, you can jump right in and play the digital version without a problem. There is a study mode wherein you begin each round with a trivia question. If you get it right, the starting prophet will immediately draw a resource card. If you get it wrong, however, you'll instead draw a location card and sin immediately spreads there. For the most part, it's a good adaptation. My only complaint is that the game uses adaptive difficulty for its default game mode. I have never liked adaptive difficulty. If a newcomer wants to jump right into the highest difficulty, or if an expert wants to relax with an easy one, just let them. Instead, adjust the difficulty level according to your wins and losses. Nevertheless, it is a solid adaptation and even includes the Kickstarter cards. I'm just a little surprised that it's never come to Android or iOS, as those seem to be much more common choices for most board game fans, even if I personally prefer to play at the desktop myself. If you're interested in purchasing Kings of Israel or learning more, links are included in the description. But what about you? What do you think of Kings of Israel? What Bible-themed games do you enjoy? If you have any questions, remarks, or opposing points of view, leave them in the comments down below. And don't forget to like, share, subscribe, and ring that bell. And if you really enjoy my work, please consider funding my channel on Patreon. Until next time, farewell, fellow fanatics. Thank you again for watching. I have plenty more to share with you if you're interested. You can click up here above my head to subscribe to my channel. You can click over here on my monitor to see the most recent video that I've worked on. Or if you prefer, you can click up here to open this mysterious vault and see what video that the YouTube algorithm has picked just for you.